My lords, ladies and gentlemen, we're digging in for a longer session. And I think as an audience, you've been exceptional. You've made some of the speakers sweat. In fact, some of them have left a little bit upset. And I think that's a good thing. But so far, really, we've talked about this great context. And it's been very strategic. It's been applicable to everyone, from strategic to tactical all the way across, and there's been an expectation that you will derive your own correct conclusions. It's interesting to see the differences between some of those who express the focus towards CT, which I think we heard from one speaker yesterday very clearly, and others who are talking about being at war. This discussion between war and non-war, or as Lucas Kello from Oxford puts it, an unpeace that we find ourselves in. But that sort of strategic level is for yesterday, and today, this session specifically, we really want to dig into some of those challenges at the operational and tactical level. And as General Milley said rather brilliantly yesterday, we are somehow suffering from a conceit of the present, this idea that we are the most important generation ever. Information, big data, AI, those challenges for us make us the most important people in the history of the world. And this conceit of the present is a very Western perspective, because part of this is about the enemy as well. The enemy, your competitors, your rivals, they are one and the same. And I've been very fortunate at RUSI since 2016 to be looking at how your competitors, your 4+1, fight, about how they think about fighting, because they in turn have been looking at you. And today we'll maybe take a wander through some of those ways in which they're fighting, and how they look at your information-centric, information-dependent force design, this idea of your connected force being your competitive edge as a critical vulnerability. And they are building and designing forces to counter it. The RUSI Journal articles over the past year, if you remember, you'll see them talk about some of this stuff. They don't just talk about potentially Russia, they talk about the others as well, how Iran does this, how North Korea is playing this game, and some of those great challenges that they pose. And I suppose you can see this reflected in some of the latest stuff. For example, Lieutenant General Keith Tovo from US Army SOCOM produced his strategies 2035 recently. And in it, he said, we need to start getting used to fighting in a denied environment. He wasn't just talking about the opposed river crossings at brigade level that are happening in Iraq right now and the physical stuff. He was talking about the electromagnetic environment and the lack of connectivity that needs to be expected in the future. So, yesterday we looked at World War I and World War II, we looked at Iwo Jima, we had lessons from the Cold War as well. It's also the anniversary of the Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway, I think, is really interesting from a British perspective right now, because the Japanese had purchased and built a magnificent array of boutique, exquisite, and beautiful equipment. Platforms that were world-beating, but were operating with tactics that were decades old. It was their tactics alone, not their people, their tactics and their concept of operating that unpicked them at Midway and ended or started the end of the Pacific campaign. So the answer might simply not be in better platforms or better kit. It might not even be in the dedication of your people. It will be about the concepts of how you intend to operate. General Brown set this out in the Kermit Roosevelt lecture we were lucky to have a couple of months ago at RUSI. He talked about his multi-domain battle. And it's this sort of stuff that we want to get into. How do we foresee people fighting now? And what does that mean for you? And this is where I'd like you to push you in questions. And you need to push the speakers, and it's my job to hold their feet to the fire. This is about what does it mean. This is about what does it mean in terms of the platforms, about the training, about the future of commanders, about professional military education. Perhaps the Brains Trust needs to come back into this. These are the areas where I need you to go. Where do you think R&D needs to be steered? What do the speakers think about it? These are the areas. Now, they each only have a short period of time in which to address you. This is to stimulate your questions, and hopefully we'll have a good range. We have a packed panel up here. It's a good panel, and I'm delighted they're here. I'll introduce each one, but I'm going to make it brief because, frankly, it's more interesting listening to them than me. So let's start. Lieutenant General Tim Radford, as you'd expect from a three-star officer, has commanded operational experience, stacks and stacks of education and courses behind him. He commands at a level that the British military don't often think about and haven't thought about for a long time, the corps level. You know, we've heard a lot of talk about divisions, you know, a phenomenal amount. But General Tim is commanding at the corps level. This is a very, very different game to anything we've heard before, and he faces distinct challenges. General, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The Allied Rapid Reaction Corps is a three-star operationally deployable headquarters with a permanent establishment of 450, which rises on augmentation to 750 on deployment. As the framework nation, the United Kingdom contributes 65% of the manpower, with the remaining 35% a blend of 20, soon to be 22 participating nations. So a truly multinational headquarters, therefore, with an inherent culture of interoperability, and whilst we sit under the operational command of the SACEUR, it's worth pointing out that the British elements of the headquarters remain under the full command of the CGS, who can call on us individually or collectively if there's a national imperative to do so. Since 1992, when Headquarters ARC stood up as the first NATO High Readiness Force land under Jeremy Mackenzie on the left, much has changed. Much has changed. Not least, it's been joined by 8 other High Readiness Force Corps headquarters across Europe. It's deployed 4 times, to Bosnia in '95, to Kosovo in 2000, and to Afghanistan in 2006 and 2011. And 7 years ago, it moved back from Rheindahl to Gloucestershire. But as some of you will know, its lineage and operational experience as a Corps headquarters dates back way before 1992, to 1815 in fact, when it stood up as 1st British Corps at Waterloo. Even then, as a multinational corps comprising British, Dutch, Belgian, and Hanoverian soldiers, commanded at that stage by the Prince of Orange, an officer who interestingly went from captain to 4-star in 3 years. Since then, the headquarters has led with distinction in South Africa in 1876, during World War I under Haig, at Normandy under Crocker, and then for 40 years was a headquarters in Germany looking east at the Soviet bloc during the Cold War. Today, and throughout 2017, we're on standby as the Land Component Command Headquarters for the NATO Response Force, having been certified in November by Landcom. We took over from the Spanish headquarters in January and will hand over to the Italian Corps headquarters in January 18. Our task this year, to respond, as we have done in the past, to contingency on orders from SACEUR on behalf of the NAC, or indeed to be prepared to deploy as a headquarters nationally if the situation demands it. Yet while the ARC enjoys a relatively strong operational pedigree and has a heritage that we're extremely proud of, we recognize that we can't really afford to sit still. Indeed, more than ever, we need to adapt. We all feel the same sense of collective responsibility to drive its development forward, in recognition of the threat streams, but also in recognition that any organization that doesn't change and evolve will atrophy and likely become ineffective. As an aside, but worth being aware of, our sister high readiness forces across Europe are all very different by dint of their history, location, or structure. Importantly, so too their balance of NATO and national responsibility. Currently, the ARC's tasks, by way of illustration, are approximately 80% NATO and 20% national, while the French Rapid Reaction Corps, for example, are the direct opposite. Moreover, while some high readiness force lands have core troops permanently attached, others do not. In addition, some lean more towards being a joint task force headquarters than a land component headquarters, while some, ourselves included, believe that first and foremost, we should train as a core headquarters at the higher tactical level with an ability to ramp up to being an operational level land component headquarters or joint task force headquarters as required. So in times of crisis, SACEUR has a number of land options available to him, each with their own challenges, but each also with their own strengths. I'm pleased to say that under the headquarters Landcom as our effectively environmental godfather, the Corps headquarters are now beginning to achieve greater coherence. I don't propose to re-examine the likely threats. Suffice to say that in this era of constant competition, we now consider our main threat stream to be a near-peer enemy who can mass quickly and against whom we can no longer guarantee air superiority. An enemy whose land forces are readily deployable on internal land lines of communication, who can deliver massed fires, surface-to-air missiles, coastal defense missiles, and land attack tactical ballistic missiles. One that poses a significant A2AD threat, who has centralized decision-making, a propensity for deception, an advanced cyber and EW capability, and a burgeoning ability to disrupt below the Article 5 threshold through conventional and regular or asymmetric means. So extremely challenging, and something that's not been at the forefront of our thinking in recent years as we've focused on counterinsurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan. But we're on it. And you'll appreciate that it would be inappropriate in public forum to detail how the ARC and the UK more broadly might respond from a core perspective to these threats. But what I would say is that for the past 12 months, whilst continuing to certify as a land component headquarters, as part of our concept development and experimentation program, we started on a journey with partners of what we're styling as core recalibration. After several months of analysis, we've identified some significant areas for development, now housed in a 4-year recalibration program, which draws on recent historical lessons and which projects forward into the challenges we're likely to face in the contemporary operating environment. And of course, as we modernize and adapt, our findings will serve to inform others and provide an opportunity for greater cross-fertilization across the NATO land and indeed joint space. You'll understand also that if in the time available, I don't cover the plan in any great detail, but I would offer 3 areas to provide a flavor of our direction of travel, which we can pick up in questions. Let me begin with C2. For me, the essence of command at the core level is first to be able to resource, synchronize, and direct the divisions and any other subordinate elements. Second, to be in a position to design, shape, and command the core deep battle. And thirdly, to influence through key leader engagement forward. The core headquarters that I inherited was a perfect design for Camp Bastion, or a humanitarian operation. A tented camp of 750, which took 14 days to set up. But to my mind, not an act of war. During the Cold War, a core headquarters moved regularly. We have forgotten how to do that. Today, we need to be much cleverer about how we command forward, something that is central to our recalibration plan. How to hide and operate in plain sight in the rural and, more importantly, the urban environment, and how to survive. The issue of where the commander and his deputy should be on the battlefield remains important. So too the centrality of reach back to the main headquarters commanded by a chief of staff who, working off the commander's intent, tees up appropriate and timely decisions. Our C2 construct is crucial to our concept development, which is being exercised initially this autumn as part of our major exercise Arcade Fusion, when we'll have 5 multinational divisions under command and one which will shape the rest of the recalibration journey. Second, we're examining what constitutes today's core deep battle. As such, we're defining in conjunction with the 3rd Division and on Arcade Fusion this autumn with the US 4th ID, the Canadian Division, the Italian Acqui Division, and the Danish Division, where the divisional deep battle stops and where the core deep battle begins, and what it comprises. Traditionally, the core headquarters is responsible for resourcing and synchronizing the divisional close battle while fighting its own deep battle between a coordinated fire line and the fire support coordination line through a combination of lethal and non-lethal activity. The lethal, including gun, rocket, missile, and SCAT-min and attack helicopters, while the joint systems include air-delivered munitions, naval gunfire, possibly TLAM, and special operations forces. The non-lethal, to include information activities and psychological operations, but now with increased core and LCC level focus on cyber electromagnetic activities, or CEMA. All of these need to be redefined, retaught, and practiced. And most importantly, the effects need to be integrated. The requirement, therefore, goes much further than simply deconfliction. Shaping the enemy at range, fighting the deep battle in order to enable success in the close and to protect the rear has grown in importance. The deep battle takes on even greater significance in the contemporary environment because, crucially, we can no longer depend on our own dominance of the air. We also recognize that there are some capability gaps in our deep, close, and rear arsenals, some of which can be bought out by being part of a coalition, but others which, candidly, we need to resource. Third, to be truly effective as a modern core headquarters, we need to harness and develop a technological edge over our enemy, both to protect ourselves and to have an effect on him. By 2020, there will be an estimated 4 billion people on the internet operating 40 billion internet devices. All of our military equipment relies on some form of technology. So we need to recognize and guard against our own vulnerabilities by increasing our understanding, our levels of protection, part of which is as weaning ourselves off a reliance on information systems that have been so readily available to us all in Iraq and Afghanistan. We've also got to strike the right balance between drawing on the myriad applications that harvest open source intelligence and the need for a rich information picture against our noisy MCON signature and our subsequent bandwidth limitations. It will be a delicate balance and absolutely the preserve of the commander and the principals in a headquarters, not just his communications expert, and falls directly, to my mind, in the bracket of J3. So a flavor only, and with humility, offered in full knowledge that we still face a series of additional challenges, some of which we've already identified, others we know will emerge, and some which we simply haven't foreseen, and which will demand a combination of human, technical, and procedural agility to deal with. So we're a core headquarters that's in transition, one that recognizes its NATO's responsibilities first and foremost, but one that arguably has a wider national utility in terms of training, persistent engagement, beside, with, and through our chosen allies and partners, and indeed operationally if required. We're adapting to the challenges of an increasingly decentralized and complex battlefield, where interoperability and multinationality are the new norm. We're very conscious nationally of our potentially increased relevance in a post-Brexit United Kingdom as well. Indeed, as the Secretary of State commented during a recent visit, it's no coincidence that we've chosen to make the British core headquarters a NATO core headquarters. So we'll continue on this recalibration journey at the same time as fulfilling our certification and national standby commitment as a joint task force headquarters and land component headquarters. As such, we'll redesign a scalable headquarters that when deployed in a warfighting or potentially warfighting scenario is able to survive with a painfully small forward CP, is technically superior, joint aware, low profile, and one that can operate effectively with minimal MCON. We aim for a headquarters which is mobile, protected, agile, distributed, and potentially dispersed, with maximum reach back, and whose procedures empower a staff that can cue decisions to the commander. A headquarters which draws on the strengths of its multinational staff, and one which understands, is connected to, and coherent with the other high readiness forces that will potentially operate alongside. A credible headquarters, now with a revised doctrine, one that can analyze risk, find solutions, and where appropriate, tactfully speak truth to power in NATO to drive concepts forward. A headquarters that can plan, command, support, synchronize, allocate resources to, and manage the battle space for up to 5 divisions, as well as shape and command the deep battle in support of maneuver divisions and special forces, all delivered through integrated action. It will also be a construct that allows the commander to make decisions forward, to reinforce his intent in person and to influence through KLE with a host nation, as well as the myriad actors on the modern battlefield. Finally, interoperability will be fundamental in any future operation. This needs early investment, and as a core headquarters in this era of coalition warfare, requires us to act as a higher tactical and on occasions operational level gearing between alliance partners. And the truth is that we can't really do this by ourselves, and we don't have all the answers yet. So if you feel, particularly the junior members of the audience, that you can contribute, we would be delighted to hear from you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening.
There's some pretty impressive themes to get into there, not least of which is C2, something we've touched on earlier, people fighting back about, We need yet another layer of command and control in there. But it struck me through that really interesting discussion about the deep battle at a core level. This is something we haven't touched on. And it's something that the British military as a whole, indeed the MOD, is really uncomfortable with, and perhaps they need to get more comfortable with. But there is also this problem that sits underneath General Tim's presentation. You know, he's off to command 5 multinational divisions. At the same time, he does all these other roles. There's myriad of activities that we're throwing at him. So perhaps you want to get back into him later when we talk about some kind of specialization. Do they need to be masters of every task, or should they just be a jack of all trades at one level? An interesting question, some of which are coming through on slide now. But the one thing that General Tim talked about was near peer. You know, we didn't do a lot of talk about fighting yesterday. We certainly didn't do any talk about winning, but we did a lot of talk about near peer. And in that, we're talking about Russia. And so the next speaker, Dr. Igor Sutyagin from RUSI, is going to give us a few thoughts about that. Igor's one of probably 3 or 4 people in London who can talk about this with some authority, but probably the only one who can talk about this level. Those of you who don't know Igor, he's grew up in Russia, working for the Russian military, nuclear scientist, research bureau, but was accused of and convicted of passing secrets back to the West, spent 5 years in a gulag, and was part of a spy swap, and was one of the last guys in 2010 to come back. We're very fortunate to have him at RUSI. He does some pretty impressive research. So, Igor, over to you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here, and it's a great honor for me to speak before this audience. I will try to be rapid fire because actually it is next to impossible to describe Russian army and some advances in Russian ground forces in 10 or 15 minutes. So I strongly invite you have a look on the book which is published on that subject at RUSI. And let me try to squeeze it into some bullet points. Russian ground troops. These are forces which are doing their best to make sure that everything what General Radford described will not work. And they're doing that being, first of all, offensively oriented, secondly, being asymmetric, being really combined arms, and fourthly, exercising what can be called Russian offset strategy. So that's what they're doing. And how they're doing that, I will try to show you. Armata. It's the family of vehicles. It's not tank, it's family of vehicles. Actually, Armata is just this platform. And you can put whatever you want, unmanned module atop of this platform, and a crew will be always under protection at the degree of main battle tank, the newest main battle tank. So that is the Russian variant of Striker with just one difference. It can go in harm's way, unlike Striker, which can find necessary to hide against fire of Armata. So that is surely not for defensive operations. You cannot dig in offensive, so that's why you need this protection. That is what they're trying to do. They're trying to create family of vehicles which will be able to cooperate together and be able to protect its crews in the most dangerous engagements. And T-14 tanks, which got name of the platform, also name of the platform, it's also called Armata, is the first member of that family. Heavy infantry fighting vehicles, protected to the level of the main battle tank. It's even better than Israeli do. It's T-15 Bagulnik. It is the combat support vehicle which will be able either to suppress lightly armored vehicles or provide some air defense coverage. It's not produced yet, so it still does not have designator. It is armored repair recovery vehicle, which is protected to the level of main battle tank. T-16 does not have name. And one more element which is under consideration right now, well, there are many of them, but one is very interesting. It's the modern equivalent of the British infantry support tanks. That does not exist in metal, at least I do not have a picture of that. So I show you what it might look like. It is the plan to put low ballistics 152 millimeters howitzer on the Armata platform. So it will be really something which Guderian encountered in 1941 and did not believe that it did exist. Because Guderian wrote in his memoirs when he was told, how many 152 millimeters on tank, that just cannot be true. 37, 40, 50. But that is the plan. So Armata family will include this. And that will be the core element of the Russian striking force. Russia tries to redesign its motorized infantry, so they will be, instead of battalions or battalion tactical groups, they will have approximately company-size units fully armed with Armata, having approximately same firepower as modern battalion. So that is just to be offensive. And that will be accompanied by some other vehicles, some of them also based, as a matter of fact, on Armata vehicle. That is combat service support. I just asked that question, hypothetical question. How many assault bridges does every one of you, does your brigade have? How many pontoon bridges does it have? How often does it train forced river crossing? Well, Cold War ended when Army General Moiseev ordered withdrawal in 1988 of river crossing and assault bridges from Russian units. They are introduced back into Russian brigades now. And every Russian brigade has 2 to 4 assault bridges, up to 3 mechanized, it's called heavy mechanized bridge, which is capable, well, assault bridge allows to cross anything which is up to 21 meters wide. Mechanized bridge is designed to cross obstacles up to 40, or this specific model, 102 meters wide with depth up to 4.5 meters. And then every brigade has its own organic element, pontoon bridge, which is capable to be built. Well, as bridge, it allows crossing 120 meters wide obstacle. As pontoons, well, it is not limited. And, well, that allows every brigade to negotiate between 87 and 97% of obstacles which might be met on, depending on the theater of military operations. 87 to 97% of all obstacles without need to call for external assistance. That is very offensively oriented capability, just to go ahead, not stopping before obstacles. That is what Russia is going to do. So that is offensively oriented. But that is not all. In the Second World War, the Soviet Army, Red Army, found terribly useful what they called assault pioneers. It's a unique experience, I think, never before and never after that. It was the fighting army which had 10 sapper or assault pioneer armies in its structure. It was 90 battalions specifically trained and equipped to literally cut through walls in Europe. These units were established after Stalingrad, and it was very, very important for Russia, very important lesson to learn. Because 200 days, Red Army defended and then tried to break through German defenses in Stalingrad. So it was in the Second World War, these units were disbanded in 1945, immediately after the war. In 2014, the Russian army and some volunteers fighting alongside with the Russian army tried to zig for 242 days, longer than in Stalingrad, just 4 large buildings in east of Ukraine. It was Donetsk International Airport. And Russian army was absolutely unable to break through Ukrainian defenses there for 242 days. That is why the decision was made to re-establish assault pioneer units in Russia now. And currently, the plan is to build 5 battalions of these pioneers and 1 company in every Russian field army. And Russian field army sits somewhere between British American division and General Radford's corps. So every corps will have this capability. It's not to defend, it's to break through defenses, enemy defenses. So it is offensive potential. And they are really well trained and really, they're heavily equipped, heavily armed, including flamethrowers, as a matter of fact, which is interesting. They do not shy to use flamethrowers to suppress personnel in closed environment, while it is military crime, but they do not shy. They are armed with precisely that equipment. And they are well protected to assault defenses. What is shown here is body armor of Assault Pioneer. It's SVD rifle, 7.62 by 53 Russian armor-piercing cartridge, and the distance is 10 meters. And that is the result. There is no penetration. On 10 meters SVD rifle, there is no penetration. They are really, really equipped to go in really harm's way. So that's what they are going to do. That is the very serious offensive potential. And they are asymmetric. What I want to show is, well, Russian doctrine assumes that 60% of all fires tasks will be fulfilled by artillery, not by air force, by artillery. And you do not have defense against artillery. Even Israelis will be unable to, with their Iron Dome, will be unable to withstand pressure of Russian artillery. While your doctrine puts very serious emphasis on the operations of Air Force, and Russia does have protection against Air Force. Try to imagine hypothetical situation when a highly hypothetical 79th Motor Rifle Brigade in Kaliningrad has highly hypothetical task to break through corridor to Belarus near Suwalki. And doing so, brigade commander will have protection against Western air forces trying to suppress his hypothetical advances. Well, that is his protection, which he has. Depending on the type of the older equipment, which is obsolete and being retired now, is 36 channels of fire, 36 targets engaged simultaneously. Newer equipment will allow him to engage simultaneously 60 targets. And that is organic element. He does not expect anybody to arrive to protect him. That is organic element. So that's what he's going to do. That is asymmetric to your capability. You do not have anything similar to that to oppose Russian artillery fire. And the Russian side does have something to oppose your artillery fire. And that is this vehicle which is known as Rtut in Russia, Mercury. And that is the vehicle which is designed to prematurely initiate radio proximity fuses of your artillery shells. They will explode on the altitude between 400 and 600 meters, do not make any harm to Russian troops, protected troops. 3 vehicles of this type in every Russian brigade will allow to protect at least 1 battalion of Russian troops, maybe more, depending on the environment, terrain, and situation. And then there are organic element in every brigade, the jamming and spoofing station, which will jam and spoof GPS-assisted munitions and GPS-assisted, say, reconnaissance teams. Your long-range patrols can spot target, but they cannot know their coordinates. They cannot transmit this information to commanders to coordinate actions. And they cannot transmit this because every Russian brigade has so-called electronic warfare company, which jams, well, number 330, jams tactical communications on the distance up to 30 kilometers, tactical level. In UHF, 378 jams within 30 kilometers, communications on HF. 325 jams communications between brigade and higher command, opposing brigade and higher command within range of 60 kilometers. And 934 vehicle will jam communications of, forward air controllers of your forces within range of direct visibility, which might be up to 110, 150 kilometers. So it is organic element of Russian brigade. It is asymmetric. When you try to suppress Russian forces, well, think again whether you are able to communicate to suppress, to coordinate them. That is where it's absolutely correct to say that you should train to operate in denied environment. You might be denied communications. It's organic element of the Russian brigade. Russian brigade commander does not expect some magicians to come and help him to jam communications. It is always in his pocket, and he knows how to use that. And then there is one more thing, which is numerical inferiority of the Russian forces. It is another asymmetry. Well, it is about Russian forces in Ukraine, unidentified army. It's Spetsnaz, Special Operation Forces on the Russian side. But the interesting thing is not about Ukraine. The interesting thing is that on the base of operations, both Russian, Soviet, and Western, it is known that it takes up to 20 platoons of conventional troops to block and to deal with one platoon of Special Operation Forces. So correlation of forces is 1 to 20 if you deploy Spetsnaz somewhere in your operational area. That might cause some asymmetry, and that is what Russian troops, Russian command is doing now. So that is the order of battle of Russian Spetsnaz in 2013 and planned for 2018-2020. So in 2013, it is like this. Well, not that impressive, but the plan is this. Well, sorry, it will take some time. But it's worth seeing that, because that is the plan. That is the plan. And the plan is that every brigade commander will have a company of Spetsnaz in its reconnaissance battalion. So it is really Russian offset in terms of numerical inferiority against fully mobilized NATO forces. 1 to 20. That is what they're going to do. And the interesting thing is that Spetsnaz is trained to establish insurgent teams, and that is what they plan to do. Current Russian plans is to start preparations up to 45 days before open hostility. Army Corps level will launch these operations 45 days before hostility. These teams will be operating deep in your rear 45 days before you even know that you're at war. So that is highly asymmetric. And that is really combined arms. So that is Russian Motor Rifle Brigade. And what they have as their organic elements, they do have everything in this sense. Well, they do have assault bridges, electronic warfare, air defenses, Spetsnaz, very heavy artillery. I was surprised to know that standard artillery group of standard Russian Motor Rifle Brigade is larger than some of the artillery regiments of the British Artillery Brigade. It's standard. It's even not artillery unit. It's just motor rifle unit. And they have these everywhere in their brigades. And what they are going to do, they are going to use this offset. Let me come to that a bit later. They are combined arms, and they do learn how to operate combined arms. And one of the lessons which they've learned is that battalion tactical group, this fancy development, does not work. That is what they've learned in Ukraine. And they are trying to get rid of the shortcomings of that situation, because when you plan to deploy battalion tactical group, it is great. It's perfectly described in this publication, US Army Association publication, which is handed around. But the problem is that battalion tactical group cannot operate without support of larger formations. When battalion is deployed from brigade somewhere on Sakhalin, is deployed to operate in Ukraine, they arrive there and they can fight for a week, maybe 2 weeks. After that, it is nightmare because it is logistics. And the battalion commander just is not trained and does not have enough people to run logistics issues. And secondly, he does not have capacity to accept these logistics. He is tasked to fight. And so that is why battalion tactical group was found to be not fully compatible with the modern warfare. It can be just iron fist of some division, but it must be division behind. So that is the lesson which probably should be learned. And then, well, let me come back to offset, which I promised. Offset, army, Russian army, which is sitting between division and army corps in Western armies. will have battalion to jam, for instance, this vehicle, Krasucha 4, will jam anything making J-star task. And another vehicle in that battalion will be specifically designed to jam a WACS. And if there will be army group, which is precise equivalent of army corps in NATO, if there will be army group, they will have brigade, electronic warfare brigade, which will be also able to jam communications, HF communications within the range of between 900 and 3,000 kilometers, and able to jam satellite communications. So that is just to make sure that General Hodges or General Radford, first of all, are denied situational awareness, and secondly, just cannot coordinate their forces, cannot execute their task at the corps headquarters. That is the goal, and that is organic in Army Corps, Russian equivalent of your Army Corps. So that is a very interesting thing, and that has another implication. That is why that is offset. Russia is weak. Russia is working rather slowly. On political level, it's fast. On military level, it might work rather slowly. And the key to victory, as you remember, is Boyd cycle. You must run it faster than your enemy. If Russia cannot run it faster than you do, then it's necessary to make you run it slower than you can do now. And that is why they use electronic warfare. And what they will do, they will just get inside first of all, your communications. What I want to show you here is standard munitions of Russian Mstar class cannons, 152 millimeters cannons. What is interesting here is the last shell, which is ZRB-30, and that is jammer. Every Russian howitzer carries at least one shell of this type. And that is jammer. They will not send drone. They will not do anything. They will just fire that shell, which will land near your battery and will be jamming your communications there. Just that simple. 45 seconds and your communications under jamming. And that is just traditional jammer, but they are working hard to make it more effective. Well, you can change frequency, or this jammer can be operating on different frequency. So they invented something else. It was Soviet invention. It was tested, well tested in 1980s. And interestingly enough, Americans do know that from early 1990s. But as far as I know, it's still impossible to replicate it. It's called a Trochus. It is small non-nuclear EMP generator. It's very small. Rule of thumb is that the destruction, operational destruction, as it's called in Russia, is 1,000 times size the vehicle, the device. And keeping in mind that this device is approximately champagne bottle size, it means that within 200 to 300 meters radius from the explosion of this size, every semiconductor-based equipment will have its PN bridge oversaturated. So the bridge will become wall. Charges will just dissipate and create, so it will be unpenetratable. And between tens of seconds and tens of hours, which will take to dissipate charges back, your semiconductor-based electronics will not operate. It's just that simple, and that does not depend on frequencies of your communication. It will just kill, well, not literally kill, make non-operational your semiconductor-based electronics, which means everything. And that is E29, the large device, E47 is the small device, and just to give you an idea of the size of these devices, it's a handheld grenade launcher, and these are their grenades. Atropos grenades of these launchers. And that has some very interesting implications. You try to defend tanks against Russian hand grenades. But, well, it's possible to launch something like E47 grenade, and that will jam your active defenses. And that is here. That is in service. It's RPG-30. It is in service. You might find it. Well, it is in Russian troops, and they do have it. And so that is how they can get inside your Boyd cycles, making you, network-centric based army, non-operational. If you do not know how to operate without radios, without computers, without, well, just reading maps, that is very important attempt. That is the Russian offset. And there is one more element of that. What if you try to merge electronic warfare and cyber, as Israelis did in 2007, when they managed to poison Syrian air defenses, jamming them with a jamming signal carried out some virus, which penetrated the system and went to the very top, so everybody flying there. Well, the target was IFF unit in Identification Friend of Foyer in Syrian air defenses. And for 70 hours after that jamming, everybody flying over Syria was friend. And so friendly Israeli fighters friendly arrived to Syrian nuclear reactors, in very friendly way dropped bombs, destroyed these reactors, and returned back to their bases as friends of Syria. For 70 hours, everybody was just friend. That is what Russia is trying to do. And that has very serious implications for you, network-centric based armies. Because unlike Syrians, you have plenty of entry points for this sort of jamming. Harris is the sponsor of this company. It's Harris Radio. Every Harris Radio, not only Harris Radio, every infantryman carrying out this digital communication suite will be potential entry point for this jamming plus virus suppression. And that is real offset. That can destroy your army if you do not think about that in advance, if you do not get ready to oppose this sort of threat. So that is why I call that Russian offset strategy. They are trying to destroy, literally destroy, not only your situational awareness, but your ability to operate as a whole. And just to make the final comment, that is what I want to say. First of all, it was tactics, as it was mentioned. It was tactics which allowed to win in Midway. These tactics, if you have a closer look on Russian operations over the last 25 years, these tactics is not new, being just observed as hybrid warfare in Ukraine. If you follow Russian operations, if you create metrics of these operations, you will see that they operate in this way over the last 25 years. So they are at least quarter of century ahead of you in terms of tactical experience of implying these tactics. So that is the first lesson which is necessary to keep in mind. You have to relearn your lessons of the Cold War. Russia never stopped. They kept advancing the experience of the Cold War. And the final comment which I'd like to make on that is the news which just arrived last week. Russia has finally agreed on the next state armament program. It's called State Armament Program 2025. And the news is that the top priority in this program for the period of 2018-2025 is the land forces. So you do have something to think about, because Russia is they mean business. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you might be hanging your heads and wondering what the future is against this sort of thing, and you'd be right. The most popular question out there right now is, Igor, is there any good news? I think the answer is no, pretty much, but as Tom CS often says at our RUSI discussions, let's not build them out to be 10 feet tall. There are, however, about 170 of them in uniform for every one of you, so mass does matter. Interestingly, that Igor brought out there this concept of combined arms. It's common language. We all get what combined arms is. But in the Russian parlance, in their doctrine, their philosophy, is combined arms in a completely different way to that which we understand. They aren't just simply talking about infantry and fires, and they're talking about the inclusion of SF, of EW, of cyber, as an intrinsic part of every single brigade. This is not task organizing for the mission. This is organized combined arms for everything. It's a completely different philosophy. And not only do they address it in that way, they also fight with a different set of rules. And Igor sort of touched on this in terms of flamethrowers. They're not fighting by your rules. They don't apply the same levels of oversight, of scrutiny, of restrictions in what they're willing to do. And you only need to look at and read some of the reports of activity from Russian forces on the ground in Ukraine or Syria or Chechnya or in the Balkans. You can even, hopefully, we can get Igor to recall the Spetsnaz mission in Sweden a couple of years ago, which caused some real interest. These are really difficult questions for which you need a really brilliant mind to sort through them and say, so what? We're really fortunate, therefore, to have David Kilcullen here, who is used to dealing with wicked problems. For those of you who've read his books and haven't derived any piece of knowledge or wisdom from them, is obviously, well, it's beyond me. David Kilcullen has been a part of the fabric of the military discussion for more than a decade. Huge experience, and whilst used to dealing with wicked problems, he also facilitates the answers, and I think that's probably one of the most special things that we actually need. David.
Thanks. So not to contradict you straight out of the block, but I'm absolutely not a big brain, and I'm certainly not a senior officer or a distinguished thinker, but I think I can say without fear of contradiction that I am the scruffiest person on the panel. So what I want to do is bring the kind of grungy field guy perspective a little bit to what we're talking about today. I do, though, want to go to one conceptual point to start with, which is, what do we mean when we talk about combined arms? And I think the essence of combined arms hasn't changed and won't change in the future, but the means by which we achieve that may well. And, you know, the essence of combined arms is to put the enemy on the horns of a dilemma by bringing a number of capabilities to the fight that have complementary effects, so that when the enemy tries to protect themselves against one set of capabilities, they're exposing themselves to another. And in World War I, the way that you achieved that was infantry, tank, artillery cooperation. By World War II, it was air, land, and to some extent artillery cooperation. By the end of World War II, it was air, land, and sea combined operations. In the Cold War, it was air, land, battle. As we just heard from Igor, the capabilities that are being brought to that are changing all the time, but the essence of the concept is still extraordinarily straightforward. How do you put the enemy on the horns of a dilemma by bringing capabilities to the fight where you can protect yourself against one, but you're opening yourself up against another if you try to do that? So what I thought I'd do is sort of bucket my remarks into four categories: the environment, the threat that exists in that environment, some of the responses to the threat, and then some of the implications for you guys to think about. The environment, we've talked a lot about it. It's going to be extraordinarily crowded. Another 3 billion people on the planet by the middle of the century. For perspective, it took all of human history right up until 1960 to get to a total global population of 3 billion people. We're going to add the same number of people in just the next 30 years. Secondly, it's extraordinarily connected. Gigantic explosion in handheld mobile connectivity, primarily in the developing world, since the year 2000. One datum point, in the year 2000, there were 30,000 cell phones for the whole country of Nigeria. By the year 2012, there were 113 million. I'll save you doing the maths. That's a 278,000% increase in just over a decade in access to cell phones, the internet, and in particular smartphones. And that changes the environment in complex ways. It's going to be a much more urbanized environment. Of that 3 billion people I talked about, more than 80% of them will go into urban environments, primarily in the developing world. As of the middle of 2008, the world is now more urbanized than it is rural. By the middle of the century, it's going to be about 75% urban. And then finally, it's coastal. Already 80% of the population on the planet lives within about 50 miles of a coastline. By the middle of the century, it'll be closer to 90%. So it's going to be a very cluttered environment. Lots of people, lots of things, lots of electronic connectivity. And the best way to think about it, I think, as we move forward, is as a mesh of nodes, kind of a matrix of urban, rural, and peri-urban nodes that exist in multiple domains at the same time. So one of the teaching tools that we use for junior officers is the idea of reserve demolition, where you're defending a bridge, right? And if you think about a bridge in the upcoming environment, it exists in a physical sense, it exists in the air domain, in the land space, it's probably in a littoral zone, so it can be struck by a sea-based weapon system. You can strike it from the air with conventional aircraft, or probably from beneath using a sub-tactical UAV. But it also exists in the electromagnetic spectrum, and Igor spent a lot of time talking about that. It can be hacked, spoofed, jammed. You can prematurely initiate demolition devices on the bridge using various forms of electronic attack. The bridge itself, these days, probably has SCADA systems, industrial controllers that make the drawbridge work or make the lights work, that are all connected on the internet as part of the Internet of Things. So it now exists in a cyber domain as well. And of course, it sits within a network of flows, within an urban environment of traffic, of people, of water in the river space. So that very basic teaching tool that we use, we've been using for 20 or 30 years to teach company commanders how to think about the combined arms fight, turns out to be dramatically more complex in the environment that I'm talking about, because you're looking at multi-domain, not just in the traditional air, land, and sea idea, but in terms of physical and virtual, in terms of electromagnetic spectrum and cyber, and then in terms of its relationship to a broader network. So if that's the environment, let's talk quickly about the threats. I like to quote James Woolsey, the CIA director in the 1990s, who was once asked what he thought the threat would be in the post-Cold War environment, and he said, "We've slain a large dragon," talking about the Soviet Union, "but now we find ourselves in a jungle filled with a bewildering variety of poisonous snakes, and in many ways, the dragon was easy to keep track of." And for 20 years after Woolsey testified in 1993 and made those comments, we primarily worried about snakes, right? Non-state actors, terrorists, guerrillas, failed and failing states, all the stuff that we all came up with as junior officers. Today, the dragons are back, and we're dealing with both state and non-state threats at the same time in many of the same places. But in the intervening 20 years, the dragons have figured out how to fight like states, so like snakes. So we have state actors who are adopting non-state techniques. We have non-state actors, most recently Daesh, who are achieving levels of lethality that we traditionally associate with nation states and are actually applying conventional tactics but using non-conventional means. The most obvious example of that from the non-state side would be the ISIS capture of the government centre in Ramadi in May of 2015, where they suppressed the environment with a sniper screen, waited for a sandstorm to come in which obscured the battlefield. They then secured the front edge of the T-wall around the government building, reduced the defences using an armoured bulldozer that they'd made in a back alley by bolting armour onto a civilian bulldozer. Once they had a 70-metre wide gap in the perimeter, they pushed 7 suicide bombers through that gap simultaneously, knocked out the entire front edge of the defence, and then pushed a series of 20 to 40-man combat assault groups through that bridge. That's a non-state actor, but if you think about the technique being applied, it was suppress, obscure, secure, reduce, assault. It was a classic, conventional, deliberate obstacle breach, but just not using our technology or our methods, or our means, but using different means to achieve a conventional tactical outcome. And so I think what we're seeing here is threat actors who have very different identities. Jihadists, Russians, Koreans, people from a variety of medieval ideologies, but also postmodern approaches, all converging on the same basic set of techniques. And when you look at these, there is a lot of commonality among the different threat actors that we are dealing with. One is the idea of modular structures, modular down to extraordinarily low levels, pairs or groups of 4 to 12 people operating more or less autonomously. Distributed operations, which I know you talked about a lot yesterday. There's a tendency amongst most of our adversaries to hug our technology. I use the example that in Syria right now, rebel groups are using iPads to provide precision fire for homemade mortar systems. And the way that it works is you use your compass and your inclinometer on the iPad to figure out your azimuth and elevation. You use a set of firing tables downloaded from the internet to figure out the number of charge bags to apply. You've got your adjusted atmosphere based on a ballistic computer on the iPad. You then fire your adjusting round. Your remote observer drops a pin in Google Earth, which then appears on your iPad, and you adjust from there. So you can go straight to fire for effect off of one adjusting round with a handheld iPad. Now, that's interesting. What's really interesting is that's a US government military satellite system plus a US-owned computer app that's being used to run that system. Why can they do that? Because they know we can't shut that system off because we need it. And so they're hugging our systems, knowing that they can use them without fear of us jamming them because we need those systems. One of the imperatives, which I'll come to later, is we need to learn to fight unplugged. We can't be able to operate against an adversary like that if we're so reliant on these systems that we can't turn them off. The other key thing that we're seeing in the adversary picture is the emergence of cyber kinetic operations. When cyber warfare was first being talked about, there was an idea that it was going to be a standalone form of conflict, that there would be cyber wars that would be distinct from physical conflict. That's not what we're seeing from the threat. What we're seeing is the use of cyber as an adjunct maneuver space alongside physical maneuver. And again, for a concrete example, I don't think you can look to any better example than the Ukrainian D-30 howitzer hack of January, February this year. So much as I use the example of the iPad, a number of Ukrainian officers designed a system to do precision fires for the D-30 howitzer by using an Android cell phone app. The Russians hacked that app, figured out a 10-figure grid reference to every gun position using the app, ran an information operation to convince more people to use the app, waited about 6 months, and then launched a major cyber attack that took down the app, but also used it to direct counter battery fire against these artillery pieces at the same time as they launched a physical offensive operation on the front line. So the important thing here is it wasn't just a cyber attack that stood alone, it was the use of a cyber attack in conjunction with a kinetic physical attack to extend and deepen the effect of a physical operation. That's what I mean by cyberkinetic, the overlap of those two domains in a combined arms, synergistic kind of way. It's also, if you like, an example of cooperative engagement, which is just like the iPad example from Syria, which we're seeing from the threat. Also, I guess that you could consider the D-30 something of a low-tech platform, but with the high-tech insert of that Android app, it's now capable to do much higher degrees of precision fires than we've seen in the past. So this is another theme that we're seeing with the threat, which is the injection of high-tech inserts into generally low-tech platforms that are hard to hack, relatively easy to acquire, relatively cheap, but with the addition of usually repurposed consumer electronics, you're now looking at a much more lethal and capable component. A large number of small groups. I gave you the example of the small assault groups and the attack on Ramadi. We've seen that in Ukraine, we've seen it in Syria and Iraq and a number of other places. It's not yet the full swarm operations that have been talked about for 10 or 15 years, but it's getting there. The idea that you can throw in additional small teams to a fight to achieve a large-scale effect without having to have a large-scale or complex command and control system. That's another theme, which is the idea of offset or remote or in some cases leaderless command and control, where you don't have a headquarters. There's no secret plan to hack. There's no commander giving orders that you can knock out with a JDAM. There's no hierarchical command and control system that you can disrupt. It's simply a leaderless system based on rules and protocols that individual combat groups follow. The tactical goal of most of these adversaries that we see operating in the environment is to create a bandwidth challenge for us, right? Not to do one single deep thrust that disrupts our system, but rather to mount simultaneously a very large number of attacks across the complete breadth and depth of our entire system. And the idea is that we're going to face so many challenges simultaneously that it'll be very hard to figure out what to deal with first, or our systems will simply be overloaded. It's much more in the vein of Mikhail Tukhachevsky than, say, JFC Fuller or Liddell Hart. It's not blitzkrieg, it's deep battle, but applied at a much more tactical level. So that's the environment and the threat. The responses that we're thinking about, and most of these are very obvious. One of them is integrated air-ground operations, the ability to, for example, launch a drone from the back of a vehicle at the sub-tactical level, to have units that can provide their own vertical envelopment or vertical reconnaissance, achieving fire dominance, rapid, localized in terms of lethal effect, and also very focused, so quickly winning the firefight in order to start the maneuver process, developing our own form of cyberkinetic operations, fighting unplugged, as I talked about earlier, distributed control of fires. One of the things that was quite useful in the Ukrainian app that was developed last year for controlling D-30s was that every weapon system could talk to every other weapon system using the cell phone network, and you could mass fires from dispersed and hidden gun positions onto a single target. We can already sort of do that, but the ability to do that in a very cluttered, urban, complex environment is something that new capabilities will be available for in the next 10 or 20 years. Modular mobile logistics. Logistics, as we've already talked about, is the Achilles heel of a lot of these systems. And so the ability to focus on the fight and not have to continually bring forward resupply systems or bring units out of the battle to refit is a key element of the response. Control of large urban environments by interdiction or influence rather than occupation is an incredibly important part of the response here. When you secure a block of flats that has, let's say, 100 apartments in it, theoretically you might need to leave a company or two behind to secure that building unless you've got the ability to dominate interior space without soaking up manpower. And so the ability to control an urban environment, to influence the urban environment but not have to occupy it, is going to be an incredibly important part of fighting in this very urbanized environment without rapidly losing the manpower that we need. We're fighting wars amongst the people, but of course we're also fighting them amongst the people's social media and the people's social networks. And one of the things that we see from the threat is the use of diaspora networks for retaliation. We've seen this several times recently in London and in Paris and elsewhere in Europe, where as Daesh is pushed on the battlefield in Iraq and Syria, the easiest and most strategic retaliatory approach is to attack in the homeland using diaspora networks. Of course, we could do the same thing to them, but we've tended to be in a defensive crouch, thinking about how do we defend against that. I think to just quickly finish up with some implications. We mentioned that what we're seeing is a lot of different groups adopting similar tactics. And I think the obvious point here is that these are adaptive responses to an environment that we created by our dominance of a very particularly defined, fairly narrow understanding of kinetic warfare. We've created some adaptive pressure on all of our adversaries, which is making them move to various different approaches that all look rather similar, even though they come from different backgrounds. One of the implications is we may be in danger here of conceptual envelopment. If we have a much narrower definition of warfare than our enemy does, then two very dangerous things can happen. One, the enemy can be engaging in warfare against us, and we don't notice because what they're doing is not something that we define as warfare. And the invasion or the occupation or the activity can be all but finished before we realize it's even happening. The flip side of that is we can be doing things that we think are normal peacetime activity or normal political competition, and our adversary can be interpreting those as warfare if they have a much broader definition of war than we do. And I actually think we run that risk right now in many of the challenges that we're facing as an alliance. So the capability decisions that we're making now will actually influence the environment that our adversaries adapt to over the next cycle of adaptation, the next 10 or 20 years. Another implication is that we're seeing consumer technology, particularly cell phones and smart handheld devices, being repurposed for military use. And as Dave Hambling, who's a tech reporter, has pointed out with respect to drones, the rate of adaptation and development of tech in the consumer world is many times faster than in the military acquisitions process. In the case of drones, he estimates it's about 4 times faster. And so as we go through one improvement iteration on our larger platforms, somebody that's repurposing consumer tech can be going through 4 or 5 or 6 iterations of improvement. And that means that we will continually be being outpaced by smaller, more commercially oriented systems. Clear point that I think was probably touched on yesterday, the appetite for large-scale expeditionary deployment of Western militaries on the part of our politicians is just not going to be there for the next 10 to 20 years. And so one of the key imperatives is that we have to figure out how to make the light footprint work. We're not going to be doing this with a traditional counterinsurgency approach of one rifle company per village. We're not going to be doing it with a traditional stabilization operations approach where we can put 50 or 100,000 troops into a fragile state that we want to stabilize. Nor should we want to do that given the way that the threat environment has developed. So making the light footprint work is going to be extraordinarily important as part of the response. And I think that by definition means integrated air-land operations. It means significant use of SOF or SOF-like forces. And it means that we need to get much more into the modular cyberkinetic type of operations that I've been talking about. So to summarize, we're looking at warfare in a crowded, cluttered, mostly urban, mainly coastal environment against a mix of state and non-state actors who are all sort of copying from each other's techniques, have adopted very similar approaches, and are trying to overwhelm us with a multitude of small challenges rather than defeat us with one single large challenge. The essence of combined arms, of putting the enemy on the horns of a dilemma and exploiting our mix of capabilities to create vulnerabilities that we can then develop, will remain, but the tools and the tactics and some of the techniques and technologies that are out there will definitely change in the next decade. So that's all I have to say for now, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions and comments later on.
David, thank you. This idea of redefining combined arms, which was Dave's final point, I think was brilliant. And once again, I need to revisit some of those core assumptions, and we'll come back from it. One of those points that David brought out was the difference and the similarities between state and non-state actors. And we tend to classify state actors in much the same way. Again, a hugely Western perspective. And yet for global players, like the US Army, state actors are highly differentiated. The 4+1 all operate in remarkably different ways and require remarkably different TTPs and strategies to overcome them. For the US Army, dealing with this differentiation, dealing with these different challenges and problems comes down to the 357. And that is General Bill Hicks, who's got this hideously The General, as you'd expect, for a man who has been in the 82nd, the 101st, has done peacekeeping in the Sinai and warfighting operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, has a wealth of experience on which to base his judgments. He is also one of the most insightful people that we see, and at RUSI, we read everything that comes out of his office with huge interest. General Bell.
Yeah, thank you. I'll leave it to the audience to determine whether I'm insightful or not. Before I get into my remarks, I do want to say I'm particularly gratified to be seated with General Tim Radford, who's a great soldier that I had the honor to serve with in southern Afghanistan at a time of very hard fighting. I welcome the opportunity to talk to you today on the idea of distributed operations in the modern age and offer some thoughts on operating effectively in the challenging environment that Joe Milley introduced yesterday and several of our speakers here today have reinforced. I will focus primarily on the issue of nation states, acknowledging many of the non-state challenges that David just walked through, in part because as an Army, we have a responsibility to prevent catastrophe. And while Elliot Cohen noted yesterday we may be forgetting a possibility of catastrophe, we think that's back in fashion. So when I was a young airborne officer, sadly many years ago, we routinely dispersed in the enemy's rear and conducted distributed operations, playing havoc in the rear of 5th Corps in Europe and across a number of conventional units that we trained against in the United States. We operated this way because it was vital to sustaining our combat power, which was essential to the accomplishment of our mission. Guile, speed, surprise, lethality, infiltration, and attack from multiple directions, while never presenting a target to be exploited, characterized our methods. Our armored brothers operated differently, exploiting mounted maneuver, protection, firepower, speed, and reach to shape and close with and destroy the enemy through fire, maneuver, and shock effect. This was perhaps best exemplified in the 4-day ground war in Desert Storm. But, of course, it's not always been this way for armies. Indeed, the operations and initiatives to restore movement and regain initiative, illustrated here on the screen to my left, and this is only a few of many examples, reflects a combination of approaches that exploited distributed operational techniques. Some were undertaken in response to dominating fires and the loss of maneuver. These included Whittier tactics in World War I, which proved very difficult to sustain, and the failed Pentomic Division initiative of the 1950s, aimed at operating on the ultimate denied battlefield, the nuclear battlefield. And this failed for a number of reasons, including impatience. We went before we had it right. Arguably, whether we could have gotten it right is another question, because there were great challenges in command and control, fires, communications, and sustainment, many of the issues that you've already heard about today. Others, such as Incheon, where audacious maneuvers seized the initiative and unhinged a very dominant North Korean offensive, and Just Cause, which exploited surprise, speed, and agility to take down 22 targets in as many hours, highlight the value of finding new ways to seize, maintain, and exploit the initiative, defeat the enemy, and transition at a relentless, dislocating tempo. As discussed yesterday and alluded to again this morning, Dr. Igor's presentation made me even more depressed than I was yesterday. Rapid technological, geopolitical, and social changes mean that future wars will be fought on a highly lethal battlefield of expanded domains. These domains encompass a struggle for advantage or control in all physical and virtual realms. And indeed, the National Security Advisor yesterday raised the idea that populations are in fact a domain that we will have to operate in. These domains have expanded geographically. Modern weapons can reach further than ever before in the physical realm and are almost limitless in their reach in the virtual. We face a expanding number of actors, as David noted, with the rising capability of non-state actors as well as resurgent and rising nation states. Each of them, as Elliot Cohen noted yesterday, undertakes war in their own unique ways, and often we will find them in the same battle space. So we'll be fighting 2 and 3 wars at the same time. And it will expand in complexity. The accelerating trends of population density, human connectivity, and urbanization that David noted are fragmenting and cluttering the operating environment. What is not expanding is time. The speed of information, events, and weapon systems are accelerating, compressing decision cycles and reaction times. And given some of the discussions yesterday afternoon about information, I think that this trend will worsen significantly over time. Additionally, our adversaries went to school on the West over the last 30 years, really since the end of Desert Storm, and are now in a position to create that catastrophe that Elliot Cohen cautioned us not to forget is possible. Adversaries, existential and otherwise, seek to achieve their objectives below the level of armed conflict, and they do that in part by leveraging military capabilities to coerce their neighbors. However, when they fail to achieve their objectives by other means, they will exploit proximity, speed, and ambiguity to create a fait accompli, aimed at seizing the initiative, isolating the battlefield, rapidly creating facts on the ground, and all the while focusing on keeping us, those who would respond, out. Adversary conventional military capabilities essential to such a system of isolation, coercion, and compellence are long-range fires, mobile air and missile defense, unmanned aerial vehicles, cyber-electronic warfare, and aggressive information operations, modern combat vehicles and anti-armor capabilities, and a range of aerial fires enabled in part by a massive investment in short-range air defense that allows them to operate almost with impunity over their own forces. As I suggested here last year, Ukraine may be the harbinger of the changing character of war, and will require that we address current gaps, invest in new capabilities, and most importantly, think differently. A number of publications have written about Russian new generation warfare, and that is a term that is not unique. In fact, it's very common in American discourse right now. But frankly, and I think David touched on this a bit, it's really about new generation warfare. It's evident in the behavior of many adversaries, large and small, across the world. Key implications include the realization that the integration of air and land has been fractured. That has been one of our strengths here for the last 25 years. As was noted yesterday, if you can be seen in any spectrum, you can be hit and killed. Responsive posture, deployability, and sustainment are now back in the vogue, and we better get back at it because I think we've got some serious holes there as well. And in the context of Ukraine, and here on the chart, these pictures are all from Ukraine. A retired American four-star recently described it as World War I with technology. And when asked what he needed, a senior Ukrainian commander recently answered, concrete. So the elements of new generation warfare seek to take maneuver out of the equation. And to this point, the photo at the top left reflects the remnants of a Ukrainian brigade that was detected by UAVs and destroyed by mass fires in a matter of minutes. That sounds a lot like World War I to me. Gaps in our ability to overcome this anti-access area denial regime, the significant investments in air and missile defense, long-range fires, indeed a poor man's Air Force, if you will, tactical nuclear weapons in particular, the cyber-electronic activities that Dr. Igor talked about, and frankly, For those of us in the West, a damning parity in key ground systems are evident, but they're not unrecoverable. Additionally, the role of echelons, as General Tim noted, in a war at scale have to be addressed. Now, we've frankly gotten out of practice. Divisions and corps are formations, not merely headquarters. They execute the ISR, fires, joint, and sustainment fights. We have to recognize that brigades, the coin of the realm for the last 15 years, can only seize the initiative. It takes divisions to retain it, and it takes corps to exploit that initiative, and that's what land forces do. So the next 25 years are likely to be very different from the last. As Professor Cohen noted, our experience in the last 25 years may well be a poor lens through which to look at the future. What I think is clear is that we no longer have the luxury of operating as we have. So what we have to do then is build capability to deter and defeat military peer powers. This is going to require projecting power into contested theaters and operating without the luxury of air superiority on a regular basis. We, the land forces, are going to have to project power into other domains on a routine basis to enable the joint fight to actually be realized. We will have to fight into and inside of sophisticated A2AD environments. We cannot concede that space to the adversary. And we will have to fight into and inside complex, dense terrain, particularly the urban environments, though how we do it, as Dave noted, is an open question. And we're going to have to be able to protect our people, our units, and critical infrastructure, all the while retaining our counterterrorism and counterinsurgency competencies, because that fight is not going away. And for the U.S., we have to be mindful that we will, as the chief noted yesterday, go to war as a coalition, and we have to be capable of routinely and rapidly integrating allies, and that demands increased interoperability. These implications will demand that in the near term, because the problem of now cannot be ignored, we will have to revamp our doctrine, fix the current fight to deny enemy overmatch, and selectively build out the force in key areas, particularly in the areas of fires, air and missile defense, and some enablers, particularly corps and division. In the midterm, we must be capable of fighting into and under a sophisticated A2AD environment against a pure conventional force. Warfare will be extremely violent, lethal, and fast-paced, compressing decision cycles and straining the limits of our force generation and power projection capabilities. Our forces will fight close combat against a sensor-rich, highly lethal, precision-guided munition regime that will severely contest our freedom of action. To address these challenges, we cannot present lucrative targets, and we must punch above our weight. We will need to augment and amplify the combat power of this revamped current force with new technologies. This will begin to help us restore overmatch and regain dominance. And as a side benefit, begin to transition our force towards the future. Such investments include network suite of sensors and decision tools so that we are able to decide faster, formations with enhanced lethality, situational awareness, deception, sustainment, and standoff achieved through manned-unmanned teaming, improved direct and indirect fires, close combat dominance, novel communications networks to reduce the probability of detection and jamming. Indeed, our reliance on commercial technology in the mission command space is an Achilles heel we have to think about very hard. And improved sustainment. The U.S. Army is serious about getting after this. In the last year, we have completely revamped our S&T program, and we have pushed $1 billion into the midterm to take this collection of technologies and develop them into demonstrations that can become prototypes. But as I noted, we have to worry about not just merely the near term or the midterm, but the far term. So the challenge is thinking in time, because some of our competitors have a long view about both the past and the future. So in the far term, while the character of war will be difficult to define today, its broad outlines can be anticipated. Extrapolating from current trends, the battlefield will be very lethal, even more so than I've described so far. The speed of information events will accelerate dramatically. The support of allies and partners will remain critical, though they may lack high-end capability. Human tasks will be increasingly augmented or performed by machines. The space and cyber domains will be relentlessly contested and probably more fragile than they are today. Lines of communications will be routinely contested, if not denied. Public scrutiny and persistent enemy surveillance will be uncomfortable norms. And the behaviors and movements of massed urban populations may dictate the thrust of military operations, not the other way around. This will require that we develop and field an army to dominate in a fundamentally changed conflict environment, as General Milley challenged us yesterday. Key areas we're investing in to enable that army include next-generation combat platforms, soldier and small unit performance, nanotechnology, intelligent systems, advanced energetics, beyond novel materials, quantum effects, and synthetic biology. In all cases, new capabilities must enable the force to be increasingly expeditionary, agile, and autonomous, and at a minimum, offer step changes in improvement or fundamentally new capabilities, and at the same time, reduce the burden on leaders, soldiers, and units. Finally, we have been optimizing industrial-age mechanized warfare for nearly 100 years. And I think we've hit the point of diminishing returns, or we're at the top of the S-curve. And while many aspects of mechanized warfare will not go away, it seems clear that we are entering an information age of potentially autonomous warfare in all of its manifestations, from artificial intelligence to robotics. The study of this new age is essential. And like other ages of transition, thinking through how to operate effectively will figure prominently in the final viable future solution. What we have to do is anticipate this future. I've offered some outlines to it. As we were talking before this panel met, in 1865, at the end of the Battle of Petersburg, you could see the Battle of the Somme. Nobody knew it. And everybody in this room, almost without exception, had observers there. And we all missed it, including the people who fought it. And I had relatives on both sides. So we've got to look to that future. So a couple of thoughts on what future distributed operations might entail. Our forces have to be fast, smart, lethal, survivable, and sustainable. I would note that special operations forces, particularly our high-end troops, are fast, smart, and lethal, but they are not sustainable and they are not survivable. They will have to operate continuously on the move and be dispersed to survive, as well as to force the enemy to fight in multiple directions and address multiple dilemmas. Forces will fight for information, kill through maneuver, and exploit through fires and then maneuver. They must be able to close distances rapidly. Attacking will be fast and dispersed. Defense will consist of mass fires and effects from dispersed positions. Think hockey, not American football, recognizing both of those sports are from the New World. The challenge, as has been the case through history, will be getting mission command right at echelon, enabling communications. I don't think we can operate this way unplugged, frankly, and getting sustainment, including demand reduction, the consumption that forces are right now so demanding of. You know, when you're refueling an armored platform 3 times a day, That's quite a tale. And of course, fires. So in closing, as General Vollmer noted yesterday, we face a host of paradigm shifts now. But I would suggest that trends indicate that those paradigm shifts are but the first of many. This will demand that we anticipate this future and explore ways of thinking that are different from those of the past 25 years. Thank you.
There was a phenomenal reminder about, the reality of land combat. It's not a choice to go in there. It's not a choice whether you get to pick and choose to go against these difficult adversaries. If so ordered, you're going. And this idea about actually picking not to concede space is absolutely critical. And the other point that the General, to me, it just popped out, was transitioning this land force to be the joint force, that it needed to fight in a joint space. A wonderful segue into our final speaker, Air Vice Marshal Ed Stringer. Ed, a great friend of the Institute for a long time. Last job was Assistant Chief of the Air Staff, a huge number of jobs, a JAG driver by background, with an enormous amount of operational experience, and as with the rest of the panel, hugely well read and well qualified. Ed's currently a CDS Ops. He doesn't look at the future, he doesn't look at the adversaries, he looks almost at our own performance every day in the multiple operations that the UK is conducting, and he does this not from the headquarters in Northwood. He does it under the political scrutiny of main building, where he is engaged weekly in meeting the aspirations of politicians, ministers, and through them, obviously, the public. There are a few people who could bring this together in a joint way and address some of those challenges. Ed.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My script says good morning, so that's wrong already. We all like a story, so let me start with a brief vignette. Recently, 3 British Army 3-stars have visited West Mosul. One is chairing the next panel, no doubt brilliantly. All wanted to really understand the granularity of the battle, to get close to the front line, to really feel, to understand what was going on. All came back with thoughtful and interesting commentary. But given the themes of this conference, I want to unpick just one comment from one of them, Lieutenant General Mark Carlton-Smith. And we were talking in the office the other day about what he'd found, and he remarked, Ed, there's obviously some pretty advanced J-tackery going on that I'm not sure we fully understand. By J-tackery, he was referring to Joint Terminal Air Controllers, those who coordinate all manner of air support. In old money, forward air controllers who called in offensive support on targets they could physically see in front of them. But today's JTACs, and in fact their tactical commanders, are clearly informed by, calling on and coordinating a much more sophisticated system of information providers and executive agents. And I will unpack that a little more over the next 10 minutes. But my theme this morning is that tactical land commanders are ever more networked, informed by, and yet also constrained by the wider context. And we must design structures and practices around this premise. And I'm going to look at 2 of today's military challenges to show that this theme applies across the board. Those are the fight against violent extremist organisations, most obviously and pressingly Daesh at the moment in Iraq and Syria, and the return of the hostile state in the form of a revanchist Russia. So let's stay with the fight against Daesh, where we started with the vignette. And here the tactical battle is getting ahead of our doctrine. The Iraqi security forces are fighting an incredibly tough battle in Mosul as we speak here today, and we are supporting them. And let's just remind ourselves of the reality of that, because it's easy, certainly by day 2 of a conference, to start talking about information manoeuvre and all sorts of abstract concepts. Let's remind ourselves that the nature of land combat hasn't changed. Let's remind ourselves of the really gritty reality of what is going on in a very difficult, sometimes horrific fight on the ground in Mosul at the moment. We need to learn the lessons from that fight. We haven't actually been directly involved in one for a while. And I'm pleased to say I'm working very closely with Commander Field Army, Tom CS and his teams to do a pretty in-depth mission exploitation on this. Because, and back to the theme, trying to get as close as you can to the fight, you cannot necessarily see what is going on by getting ever closer to the F echelon. The information battle certainly involves a broad network, and it will be hard to know exactly where to go to see the detailed picture of what is a global net. Perhaps one of the regional targeting centres, where high-end intelligence from all the coalition intelligence agencies is fused with the local knowledge of locally recruited youngsters monitoring social media. And I think you saw some of that yesterday, didn't you, on day one of this conference. Electronic warfare analysis from the UK and the US principally is fused with locally derived imagery, which in turn is augmented by that from our UAVs linked in real time from cabins in Lincolnshire and Nevada routed through stations in Germany. And all this is being dynamically managed. It is not passive. It is not passive surveillance of the picture in front of you, which you then react to. And social media works two ways. So by using it, we can communicate with and influence the population affected by the battle, which leads us, of course, therefore, beyond the tactical level into the operational and strategic. Because the way this battle is being fought is being watched and commented on by others, keen to use information for their own ends. How the battle in Mosul is won, and crucially seen to be won, will resonate in the rest of Nineveh and Anbar too. It will affect the vital ground of the Sunni political conscience, which is key to long-term stabilization in Iraq and the prevention of Daesh 2.0 arising from the ashes of the current physical caliphate. But the rest of the world is watching too, and not least the Russians, who featured a lot this morning, keen to find disobliging parallels with their own operations around Aleppo. And the messages that flash around the world will affect those who might be radicalized, and that includes those at home here in Europe, in the West, in the UK. So the front line of the fight against domestic terrorism is in Mosul and Raqqa. No longer can we think neatly of home and away operations. So the dimensions of the threat are physical, virtual, and ideological, and we have to address all three. And with the speed that information now travels and propagates, tactical commanders have to be aware of how their actions fit into the bigger picture as never before. And they may have to act and expend energy and their own scarce resources to achieve desired effects well beyond their own command boundaries and perhaps at the expense of their own tactical objectives. The Secretary of State who spoke this morning has also spoken recently about the use of offensive cyber against Daesh. This is coordinated with all other kinetic and non-kinetic activities in theatre, and much of it is being done to limit the spread of a violent ideology that could have a direct impact on our domestic security. Who decides on those priorities? Spending resource to win the local physical battle or the wider ideological one? Can this prioritisation be left to local commanders in theatre? And let's look at some of the dimensions of the battle space that we ought to think about. It has legal, ethical, moral, and political dimensions that have to be grappled with. Who is a legitimate combatant when targeting Daesh media and comms? What is the status of proxy forces? How do we cope when some of those linkages, certainly in cyberspace, bring us close to home and domestic legislation? And so this introduces the question of tempo. We're good at running military activities quickly and responsibly. And looking around this audience, I bet 90% of you have spent many, many days at West Down Camp banging out fragos and shown that you can get inside an opposition's OODA loop, etc., etc. But are we as good at coping with thorny legal or policy matters when it comes to dealing with media and social media and targeting in this incredibly complicated environment? Can we move quickly enough here to maintain the advantage against an opposition not so trammelled by legal niceties? Which brings me on to the second scenario, managing the permanent competition with a revanchist Russia. And time does not allow a full exploration here, so I'll just pick on a few salient points. So putting aside for now the question, as arose a second ago, of current Russian nuclear doctrine, let's assume she is constrained to the conventional realm. As long as NATO maintains its solidarity, it will always outgun Russia economically and militarily. So Russia would be mad to unambiguously push NATO across the Article 5 boundary where all our decisions become easier. Instead, she's much more likely to continue to probe at the seams of NATO and the EU, to test resolve by using the range of options open to her, as we have seen in asymmetric, destabilising actions around the globe, which have come to be known as hybrid warfare. And at the heart of this is the ability to control information and the narrative, to make everything plausibly deniable, to use disinformation to sow cynicism and confusion, to set our own institutions against themselves, and ultimately to weaken and damage our faith in those institutions that provide our collective security. So NATO members must react as one to any provocations and must deal and manage with those provocations appropriately after that, which is why we are now working closely with the other framework nations on EFP, the Enhanced Forward Presence in the Baltics, all of whom sense or have experienced the hostile intentions of Russia, which will attempt to portray our deployments in a bad light to the regional audience and, as with Daesh, is able to move quickly unfettered by rule of law considerations or the need to tell the truth. This is what our young army commanders in Estonia are coping with daily, having to understand their place in the wider game and manage events accordingly, aware that their local actions and messaging could quickly find themselves a global audience. For this conference, it's worth noting that for the Estonian mission, the pre-deployment effort that went into preparing the information battle space was probably the most demanding and significant, bringing together intelligence agencies, comms experts, social media gurus, electromagnetic environment and electronic warfare specialists. And of course, in the age of social media, we cannot easily separate the public from the private, when the mobile phone can be so easily compromised or misused. So there are great similarities between these two problem sets, these two apparently very different foes or persistent competitors. Both make extensive use of hybrid warfare techniques. Both have a home and away dimension that is increasingly blurred. The military instrument is but one of many national instruments that have to be coordinated, and then coordinated internationally, and coordinated to achieve effects that may have global resonance well outside the local commander's JOA. This will require an increasingly coordinated whole-of-government approach. And I find it interesting that General Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in the US, is coming to similar conclusions and looking at the need for more central integration, even when his COCOMs have huge areas to worry about. Even there, he needs to integrate the power of the COCOMs when dealing with the global threats of violent extremism and Russia across the globe. And it poses the question of our modern tactical land commanders. Do they need more freedoms or do they need better network support? And the answer is surely a bit of both. The freedom to move quickly and responsibly, but aware of and in coordination with, and when necessary constrained by, the wider needs of the strategic campaign. Now, while this has always been true, tactical commanders deliver elements of the strategic plan. We're aware of 1-up and 2-up intent, etc., etc. I suggest that the linkages have never been so direct or immediate. And so those commentators who talk in exclusive terms about land information maneuver must be careful. It cannot exist in isolation with a transactional supporting relationship with other components. We must ensure that land information maneuver is seamlessly coordinated with the bigger information battle. And this has implications across the DLODs, from kit to culture. It has profound implications for people, education and training. But I will leave others to unpack that in the next session under the brilliant chairmanship of CFA this afternoon. Thank you.